If you told Wall Street 5 years ago that hydrogen fuel cell stocks were a worthy investment for the long term, you'd have been ridiculed with no end in sight. You'd hear things like hydrogen is stupid, the costs are high, and that the market simply does not exist. But today in 2022, the story is completely different. Corporations like Walmart and Amazon have rapidly realized the benefits of hydrogen technology and have started heavily investing in products that are leading the change. And Plug Power is already one of those industry leaders that has already laid out a master plan to bring zero emissions hydrogen to the masses. So in this video, I want to summarize the latest comments Plug's own CEO made about their future plans this week, and at the end, I'll analyze Plug's stock chart to get an idea for where the share price could be headed in the short term in all this volatility. But before we get into it, guys, make sure to drop me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. To kick things off, let's get right into it and listen to Plug Power CEO Andy Marsh on his commentary regarding the green hydrogen network that Plug is expected to build over the next few years. And I know on the surface it sounds very complicated as to how Plug can really approach such a massive task. I can assure you that this interview really clears up a lot of questions.
Well, Plug Power is expanding its partnership with Walmart, the green hydrogen supplier, announcing a deal last week to fuel the retailer's fleet of lift trucks. The deal builds on an existing pilot that began in 2012. To discuss more of the specifics there and much more on green hydrogen, we've got a friend of the show, Andy Marsh, Plug Power CEO. Andy, good to talk to you again. I was thinking back to the last time we spoke. It was right at the start of the Russia-Ukraine war. And you said at the time that you thought this could really accelerate the transition to renewables. What have you seen over the last 2 months? And are you getting a lot of calls from places like Europe?
The answer to that question is yes, Akiko. And as I spoke about last week at the launch of the Plug Power new brand, one of the items is that we've, in the last 10 days, have actually booked over $45 million worth of electrolyzers, mostly in Europe. Now, electrolyzers are devices that take renewable electricity and create green hydrogen, which can be used for natural gas, for fueling, and for many, many other processes.
So what Andy here is essentially reaffirming is the fact that Plug Power has a very big footprint in Europe, which is one of the fastest growing markets for green hydrogen. And as we all know, many countries in Europe, like Germany, tend to be ahead of the curve when it comes to adopting innovative solutions, just like with the automobile in the 20th century. And as a matter of fact, the European Union already has a massive hydrogen strategy already in place since 2020, after they realized that the climate change issue is becoming a more prominent thing every month. Rising global temperatures are not only creating a massive natural disaster crisis, but they've also set in place the big demand for energy independence.
Let's talk about this announcement from last week. You've already had a partnership with Walmart. You've now announced that you've already had a... Let's talk about this announcement from last week. You've already had a partnership with Walmart. You've now announced that you have you'll supply as many as 20 tons of green liquid hydrogen a day. What is that contingent on when you say as many as 20 tons?
Well, I think when I look at it, Kiko, it's just really a start. You mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that in 2012, we started with Walmart with 50 forklift trucks and expanded to 9,500. Today, we're starting with 20 tons, and we expect it to get much bigger as Walmart focuses on meeting its 1 gigaton per day. The reason we're building out this green hydrogen network are for our present customers like Amazon and Walmart. We're building the first green hydrogen network across the United States, which is 500 tons per day. We obviously think Walmart's going to be a lot bigger than that.
Walmart and Amazon, those two names you mentioned, are certainly big revenue drivers for the company. You've certainly been focused on forklifts for the warehouses. Where else do you see it expanding? Where are the opportunities for you right now?
Well, we're expanding way beyond there, Akiko. Look at our JV in Europe with Renault called Hyliion. So we expect to capture 30% of the fuel cell electric vehicle, commercial vehicle market in 2030, which would be about 100,000 vehicles per year. We have activities going on with SK in South Korea, where we're building large-scale stationary products. These products are not meant just for use in those regions, but around the world. So most of Plug Power's development activities have to do with those items. Not to mention the work we have going on with electrolyzers, which is meant for a broad spectrum of customers. For example, Roscom, the largest manufacturer of fertilizer in the world, we're building a 100-megawatt plant with in Cairo as we speak. So Plug is expanding not only in the fuel cell market, but in the electrolyzer market, as well as the hydrogen generation market.
And yet again, Andy mentions a critical point here, which is the fact that hydrogen is not only meant to power EVs, but it is a technology that can allow us to create our own energy with renewable resources. When most people think of hydrogen, they tend to think about the hydrogen electric cars like Toyota Mirai. But obviously for that specific use case, the value proposition just isn't there because batteries have already adopted that massive EV market. But instead of just the consumer end, we now need to look at the production end as to how our electricity to power those EVs is made in the first place. And that's where the industry is dominated by fossil fuels, coal, and natural gas.
Well, cost has certainly been the biggest hurdle, I would argue, to wide-scale adoption. And you've specifically talked about in the past the cost of energy in renewable energy, which is what makes this green hydrogen. Are we getting closer to that price point where it's economical to go for green hydrogen? I mean, how far out are we from that?
Well, Kiko, first, when you do deals with Walmart, I think that's a pretty strong statement that price is getting in line. We believe the number for generation of renewables needs to be about 3 cents a kilowatt hour to make hydrogen competitive. Those kind of pricings we're already seeing in New York with the 45-ton per day green hydrogen plant we're putting in place using hydroelectric power. We also see similar pricing for wind power in the wind belt of the United States. We believe, and look, we believe green hydrogen's here today, and we believe this market is accelerating not only because of national security issues, but because it is critical for helping companies meet their CO2 goals. When Walmart talks about reducing 1 gigaton per day, they need a lot of green hydrogen to do that.
Well, and Andy, on that point, there's certainly been some bold forecasts out there about the potential for green hydrogen. Goldman Sachs saying that they see an addressable market roughly $12 trillion by 2050. How much of that do you think Plug Power can tap into?
I believe, Akiko, there's going to be 3 main winners in this market, and one of them is going to be Plug Power. We have first mover advantage. We've actually do real things every day, as I always remind our staff. And I think it'll be Plug will be one of the 3, and I expect we're going to capture a large share of that market because not only are we generating the green hydrogen, we have the ability to provide all the apps.
As you guys can see, the cost of green hydrogen right now, relatively speaking, is a little bit more expensive than blue or gray hydrogen, but for certain use cases, it is actually cost competitive. And over the next couple of decades, the cost is expected to come down significantly with scale. But what's even more important is understanding the fact that around 45 to 75% of all the cost of making green hydrogen is dependent on the cost of the input electricity. So as the cost of solar and wind come down exponentially, which they already are, then the cost of green hydrogen is automatically going to fall. And obviously, since the cost of green hydrogen is not dependent on natural gas or fossil fuels, there's a lot more predictability when it comes to predicting the prices of this fuel. And that is going to create a massive value proposition for businesses, especially the ones that want to fully transition their fleets to zero emissions. But even more surprising is the fact that the green hydrogen market is expected to grow at a compound annual growth rate of almost 54% this decade. To put that into perspective, the EV car market right now is growing at around 24.5%. And so even if Plug Power is able to tap into around 5 to 10% of this market, which they should be able to given their leadership in this industry, then there's going to be massive rewards for this business if they're able to execute on their strategy. And as you can see, since Plug is already doing almost $1 billion in revenue this year, if these guys are able to tap into 5% of that $89 billion total addressable market, then simply off their green hydrogen business, these guys could pull in around $4 to $5 billion in revenue. And obviously that does not even account for the fuel cell business of Plug right now, which accounts for around 85% of their total revenue. But anyways, to wrap things up, let's quickly have a look at the Plug Power stock chart to get an idea for where this stock could be headed in the short term and what could be good buy the dip prices. As you can see, a few days ago, we had this massive sell-off on this stock and many other clean energy stocks on what seemed to be absolutely no news. And so what that tells me is that that sell-off was primarily driven by the rest of the market, specifically Jerome Powell coming out and saying that he's going to raise rates aggressively next month. And as you can see, it wasn't just Plug Power that reacted that way. The entire market in the S&P 500 absolutely tanked over the past 5 days. But what this has created is a pretty interesting buy the dip opportunity with the RSI on Plug sitting underneath 40. And since we now are below the 200-day and the 50-day moving average, we could potentially go retest this $20 and $17 support regions in the short term. And so for me personally, those are going to be my next buy the dip targets on this specific business, especially since now we are going to be stuck in this short-term downtrend because of the rest of the market. But anyways guys, make sure to drop me a thumbs up if you found some value from this video. Let me know down in the comment section below your guys' thoughts on what Andy Marsh said and how many shares of Plug do you own. But anyways guys, I hope you enjoyed this video and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Take care.